And good morning. Welcome to WDHA's Jersey Magazine. I'm your host, Jim Monaghan. My guest this morning is part of the Baseball Health Network, which is based in Ramsey, New Jersey, and he's also part of Team Ahmad. And if you're a Yankee fan, the name Ahmad should ring a bell. That refers, of course, to Dr. Christopher Ahmad, who is the head team physician for the New York Yankees. Frank Alexander, good morning and welcome to WDHA and the Jersey Magazine.
Thanks so much for having me, Jim. I'm really excited to be with you.
You know, I saw something that you tweeted the other day about mental health and UCL injuries, the quote unquote Tommy John surgery, if you will. And you and Dr. Ahmad have been talking about patients who have that surgery, who have that injury, suffering from PTSD. How did that all come about?
So, Fridays are our big operating days in a pre-COVID world. And that's actually when this study started, was back in 2019, where we noticed that the players and their parents it's difficult when you get any type of diagnosis, whether it's orthopedic or any type of health injury issue that may come up. It's not something that everybody deals with on a daily basis. If I'm a patient in a room, it can be shell shocking even for me as a patient, and because I sit on the other side of the table when I have those type of discussions. So when we're talking about the mental health side of a diagnosis, we noticed it a lot with the baseball players and their parents that were coming with them. Maybe they had mom or dad or whoever with them. We noticed that there was a change, a shift of dynamic in the office, if you will. And when we started really talking about it, was we had actually just published a PTSD study in ACL injuries, which is the main ligament in the knee. And Dr. Ahmad, after a long day of operating, he and I were talking and said, you know what, let's translate that to the UCL, to Tommy John injuries. And right now we're in 2021, and unfortunately we had the delay in COVID, but we have almost 75 athletes that have enrolled in this study that we're running. And by UCL metrics, that is a lot of players. If we talk about players that are getting injured, which I'm sure we could dive into more, there's research out there that says that there's technically 1.86 players on a college baseball team will have a UCL injury every season. 25 actually is probably getting closer to 30% of major leaguers have had Tommy John surgery. So it's a long recovery. There's so much that goes into it. And the mental health side of things has really been overlooked until recently.
You know, you mentioned Tommy John surgery and the mental aspect of it. I just saw an article in the New York Post recently where Noah Syndergaard, the Mets pitcher, who was, I guess it's going to be 2 years probably since he last pitched by the time he finally gets on the mound. He was talking about when he got the diagnosis, the word I believe he used, Frank, was devastating. And, you know, from this career standpoint, that's understandable. But I think it went beyond just the fact that this may be career threatening for him. I think that diagnosis hit him much harder based on the word that he used.
Yeah, it is devastating to a number of athletes, not just the pros like Syndergaard. You watch, I vividly remember we had a 15-year-old kid from Long Island traveled in. He actually went to our Englewood, New Jersey office. He drove all the way out from, I can't remember the name of the town, but you just watched him when you said UCL tear. He withdrew into his body. And if he could have sucked himself through the wall and into the hallway, he would have. And even mom and dad, I think they had known that there was something going on there, but just watching this young kid just kind of want to melt into a puddle, the image sticks with me so vividly. And I remember looking at him and saying, I have a questionnaire I'm going to give you the day of your surgery, if you don't mind. And I kind of started that open dialogue with him at that point in time.
You mentioned having 75 patients who had participated in this study. What was the biggest commonality that you found among them, Frank?
A lot of them at this point, they just don't want to go back to that moment that they were given their diagnosis. It's such a profound thing for a lot of these kids. Some of the other things that we've found with them, a lot of them are having emotional issues that they just want to completely avoid the remembering it. they're essentially, it's a year-long recovery, so they're not going to be with their peer group for a period of time, which is tough when that's your identity. Look, I'm going to be 33 at the end of this year, and I still act like I'm a baseball player. So that's who I am, and it's who I've always been. So if you take a kid who's half my age getting this diagnosis that he's going to be out for a year, it really is, it's ground shaking for a lot of them. Some of the other things that we've seen are some physical reactions. Their heart rate goes up. They're getting sweaty palms. Some things that you would not really think about as a patient getting an orthopedic diagnosis.
You mentioned playing baseball. In addition to Frank's medical background, he did play baseball at both the high school and collegiate levels. Can you imagine what your own reaction would have been, Frank, had you been told, hey, you have an ACL injury, you have a UCL injury? What do you think your reaction would have been?
A lot of when I think about it is, where would I have been in the season? Is this where I am about to lose my season? Say it's February, March, because now I'm about to lose a year. And I'm not only going to lose my spring, summer, and fall, but I may now jeopardize my next spring, which is unfortunate, and it happens sometimes. But I remember being a high school athlete, and I got hurt, and I remember going to the doctors, and they're like, "You're out for 2 weeks." That's 2 weeks, and I was like, "No, I'll tape up whatever I need to tape up and keep on moving." And in college, thankfully I avoided big, long time injuries. My freshman year, I actually tore my quad. And when even the coaches and my athletic trainers said, you got to shut it down. And as a freshman, and this is where I really relate to a lot of these kids, I walked on in college. I wasn't recruited. I didn't get money to go to school. I felt like I had something to prove. So I actually ran through a torn quad injury against a lot of advice. And it was because of the pressures I put on myself, even with people telling me, hey, it's the spring season. Chances are you're not going to get cut in the spring. I was going to get cut if it was going to be the fall. But it was just something that we had 50-year guys that took the fall semester off that came back that I didn't know. And some of them were guys that I felt that I needed to prove myself to because they were viewed as leaders of the team.
We're talking with Frank Alexander this morning here at 105.5 WDHA on the Jersey Magazine. The tweet that caught my eye was from you, Frank, the other day. What's saddening is that until recently, mental health has been a taboo topic. We've unfortunately had players elect to not participate in our study due to what I can only assume is the stigma around talking about mental health. And this has been an ongoing subject throughout a lot of COVID because of the isolation and everything that's been associated with that. Why do you think, after everything that we've been through and as enlightened as we think we are these days, why do you think there still is a stigma regarding our mental health?
That's a really great question, Jim. And I don't know if anybody's ever going to have the answer to it. But I look to guys like Kevin Love, Michael Phelps, the young tennis player Osaka. Those conversations need to be had, and they're not had enough. And thankfully, there's a lot of good and primarily bad that has come out of COVID. But this is one conversation that I think needs to continue further on. And I just think that, especially as a young man growing up, there was always that you didn't cry. And there's the famous line from Jimmy Dugan, there's no crying in baseball. So there's no way to, how do you take that back? And that's a conversation that unfortunately we have to have as healthcare providers in our office. Sometimes I've really established excellent relationships with sports psychologists from all over, especially during COVID, because a lot of this has been remote. These kids need an outlet somewhere. And you could talk to your parents and coaches, but maybe you need that indifferent opinion where there's no judgment passed and it's just you and another opinion.
Over the course of the summer, you mentioned crying in baseball. Over the course of this summer, I've been coaching 9-year-olds and 15-year-olds. And there is a wide range of emotions. And the nines are more prone, they strike out or there's a bad call or something. They're more prone to let their emotions kind of overwhelm them at the moment. And, there's one player I think of it off the top of my head. Hey, turn the waterworks off. And it's not that we don't want them to feel the emotions, but more like to kind of get a grip of what's going on here. You're going to strike out a lot more. As you know, Frank, baseball's a game of failure, and you need to learn to be able to handle that kind of stress and anxiety and that failure. David Wells famously said, I was never afraid to fail on a baseball field. And I think that's part of what a lot of major leaguers and any professional athlete has, that sense of, I know that at some point this might work out, but I'm going to keep on trying. Where is that thin line between the emotions taking over and just, being able to let an emotional release out, like a tear or two?
I think of when you see the clips on social media, whether it's Twitter or Instagram, a college pitcher striking somebody out, or I remember watching a video of a kid hit a home run that just to tie the game, and he's pumping his fist as he rounds the bases. Then you have the other extremes of guys showing not competitive emotion, but raw emotion. And I think that that's what needs to be kind of teased out and identified is what are the emotions that guys are doing because it's competitive in nature. You watch guys pump their glove as they walk off the mound and they, after an ending inning strikeout, and they, with the bases loaded. Yeah, you're going to be jacked up after that. Who wouldn't be, But having the emotion of injury and the other, I don't want to call them consequences. It's part of sport. If you play hard, chances are there's a high likelihood that you're going to get hurt. And how do you deal with that is it's such a personal thing that, like I said, I don't think that there's a right answer as to how to do it other than making sure that you have the right support system around you. If you don't have coaches that are supporting you, parents or guardians that aren't supportive, it's time to look around you. And if your friends and teammates aren't supporting you, that's a different issue. And I think that a lot of these kids these days, especially the adolescents, are more in tune with that and saying, hey, maybe I'm not in the right place right now. Whereas I'm growing up, I was on a travel team and my parents were like, I paid for this one. This is where you're playing. That's it. We're done. Keep on going. But the conversation has really shifted.
And obviously, we've spent a lot of time talking about baseball, but this really translates, I think, to any sport at which a child is trying to play at a high level, whether it's tennis or soccer or football, basketball, whatever the case may be. It's not just, confined to baseball. One of the things I did want to ask you about, Frank, is obviously we started talking about UCL injuries, the ulnar collateral ligament. And when that goes, Tommy John surgery is usually what results. We're seeing, especially at the professional level, starters are going through the order twice. A reliever comes in. Maybe he goes through the order once. More than likely, he's in for an inning or two at the most. What you end up happen, I think, guys are starting to throw harder and harder and harder because, hey, I only need to go 4 innings today. I only need to go 5 innings today. I only need to go 1 inning today. How much of that mentality do you think is leading to the breakdown of arms in our pitchers?
Another great question, Jim. And this is something that myself and Dr. Ahmad have endless conversations on. It's something that keeps you up at night in terms of why. Look, the professionals, that's a different ball game, pun intended. The young kids are the ones that we're most concerned about because UCL injuries are happening. When I was in college, they were happening. The average age group was in late teens, early 20s. Now, the large majority of kids in our office are 15 to 18. So that's a big thing that these kids are getting hurt younger. And two of the biggest factors of those injuries are, one, if you don't throw hard, you don't get this injury. That's just the name of the game. Mm-hmm. And so velocity, while everybody says velo is king, it's a double-edged sword. The other thing is volume. How much are you throwing and what is your rest in between those outings? Rest being, are you getting enough sleep at night? Are you resting enough between innings? And what is that workload like? Did you come in from the bullpen where you already played the first 4 innings of a game at shortstop? You had 4 plays that you had to throw across the diamond on, and now you're going to go expect to close out the next 3 innings of a game because your pen is run thin. That's something, and you're coming in with bases loaded and 1 out in the bottom of the 4th inning, and you're the last guy before the game's essentially over. The stress of an inning, not just that's extrinsic factors, but when a kid comes in that situation and they're the guy right there, that's a lot of weight on your shoulders. So there's so many different factors that we consistently think about when we're talking about UCL injuries. Obviously, like I said, the biggest one is velocity, but there are other factors that we got to be mindful of.
I mentioned coaching 15-year-olds this summer, and there are a couple of pitchers I have who are very good when it comes to control, but their velocity is not where they want it to be. I'm fine with it. They throw, can you get a guy out? As far as I'm concerned, but they're, that whole thing, they're chasing velocity. And you and Will Middlebrooks were talking on Twitter the other day. I think you may have retweeted Will. He said something about the emphasis on max velocity, and he's a former major leaguer. So he saw it, up close as he's going up through the ranks. And I can see it now with colleges recruiting. There are coaches who'll tell you, no, you don't have to throw 90 to play at the college level. But at the same time, if you're not throwing 90, the odds are you're not getting recruited, or certainly not as recruited as heavily. How do we change the emphasis on velocity being king? Can we change it?
Right now, I don't think we can. And I think that there's just too much glorification when Aroldis Chapman strikes out a guy to end the game at 103 miles an hour. There's so much about that. Even in our own backyard, Garrett Cole threw his 129th pitch the other night at 99. There's glorification of it, which, look, the fact that Garrett Cole went 9 innings through 129 pitches, which in today's baseball is almost unheard of, that's an achievement. It's an accomplishment. That's a professional athlete who has years of dedication to his craft. That's not a 16-year-old who is coming out day 1 in March on a Friday in New Jersey because it's opening day. There's so much that the metrics at the highest levels of baseball are different than what's available to the average Joe. So one way, I remember when in high school, our number 1 pitcher, my junior year in high school, he had a .89 ERA. That's Jake DeGrom stuff right now.
Yeah, right.
And he didn't top out. If he hit 85, that might be his top velocity. I think the way we get away from worrying about velocity is more worrying about development. And a lot of the good college programs develop athletes. Jack Leiter, who's the number 2 overall pick, he unfortunately had his sophomore season last year cut short because of COVID. But Coach Corbin at Vandy, he knows how to develop players. And that's why he had 2 players, Jack and Kumar Rocker, go in the top 10. So developing an athlete, in my opinion, is significantly more profound than worrying about velocity at 15, 16 years old.
You mentioned Jack Leiter. In fact, I just saw him the other day, as a matter of fact. He trains at the same place where I'm rehabbing my knee. One of the things with Jack, and his dad, Al, will tell you, Jack didn't really start throwing into the 90s until about midway through high school. So he was kind of a late bloomer in that sense. But, you watch him now, and he's 94, 96 sitting in there, obviously with great secondary pitches as well. And I think he's got a wonderful career ahead of him. I see DeGrom coming out, and he's throwing 102 on the first pitch of the game. I'm thinking, Jake, what do you, as a baseball fan and a quasi-Met fan, me as more of a Red Sox fan, as a quasi-Met fan, I'm thinking, Jake, we're going to need you in September and maybe October. What are you doing here?
I was in spring training in 2018, and I went down for minor league camp. And at the end of one of the days, I think it was the day I was leaving, and Nate Evaldi, who we have an amazing relationship with, Dr. Ahmad and him are extremely close. He it was, I think, his second spring training outing that year. He put up 100. His first three pitches were 100, 101, and 100. And I actually texted pictures of him to Ahmad as the screen was coming up because it was his first spring training back after his second UCL surgery, which we did. So it was really cool to see that. But again, this is the glorification of it right here, is exactly what I'm doing, and I need to practice what I'm preaching and not talk about it.
Frank, for players and their parents who get that diagnosis of a serious injury, what is your advice on the best way to handle it, especially when it comes to the whole mental thing, which is where we started with, a PTSD type thing? When you hear you've torn your ACL, you've torn your UCL, you're looking at a year of recovery.
The biggest thing is I tell these kids, you're not alone. You're not the first kid to tear their UCL or ACL or even your labrum in your shoulder, and you're not going to be the last. Actually, I had a kid today. We did some telehealth, and we had a young man from Buffalo who was in on our Zoom, and we actually operated on a Columbia University pitcher also from Buffalo. So the mom said, do you guys have anybody that maybe we could talk to about this, just so that their son knew that he wasn't alone? He had that. And I was like, I have the perfect guy for you. And it was this former player. And it just helps that I knew that he was from Buffalo. This kid's from Buffalo. Let me make things a little bit seamless for him. The college kid was a pitcher. This high school kid that we saw today is a catcher. So you could have that battery kind of relationship there. Like, hey, you're not alone in this. And as I mentioned, we have about 75 kids that are in this study. So that shows you right there, hey, you aren't alone. While you may be the only kid on your travel ball team that gets this injury this year, there's many other kids that have this injury, unfortunately.
Frank Alexander is part of the Baseball Health Network, which is based here in New Jersey in Ramsey, and also part of Team Ahmad, Dr. Christopher Ahmad's group at Columbia Orthopedics. Frank, for WDHA listeners who want more information, what's the best way to reach out to you?
To reach out to me, the easiest way would probably go through Dr. Ahmad's website. It's drahmadsportsmedicine.com. You can also follow me or Dr. Ahmad on Instagram. I am at frank.atc, or even on Twitter. And my Twitter is at Frankie A, as in Alexander, the number 15. And of course, give everybody a follow. And that's probably the easiest way you can communicate with us.
Frank, thanks for your time this morning. Always great to catch up with you.
Thanks, Jim.